Welcome to the Bare Marriage Podcast. I'm Sheila Ray Gregoire from baremarriage.com, where we like to talk about healthy, evidence-based biblical advice for your sex life and your marriage. And I am so excited about the interview that I have to share with you today. First, if you are listening to this as it comes out, you'll know that this podcast is out a day early. And that's because it is Thanksgiving tomorrow in the United States. And so I just thought, you know what, let's just put this out early so it doesn't launch on Thanksgiving Thursday, because I didn't know that that would be that great an idea. But as we're getting into Thanksgiving and thinking about the holidays, I just thought that this interview that I actually recorded a couple of months ago with Christy Bauman fits so well, because it's talking about how to honor the important moments in our lives. And for a lot of us, as we get into holiday seasons, that's when we start thinking about these things. You know, what happened to me in the last year? As you're sitting around the Thanksgiving table and you're thinking about what you're thankful for in the last year, and maybe even what was hard in the last year, you're going to remember some of those moments. And so I'm talking to Christy about how to honor those things, how to honor them in ourselves and others, and how to just treat ourselves well. And so that's what's coming. Before I bring you that interview, though, a couple of quick important things. First of all, I am so grateful to our sponsor, Ever AJ Bible Cases, and you'll be hearing more about them in a moment, but they're honestly beautiful. Rebecca and I have been using ours. They're just a lovely way to store your Bible and carry your Bible with you when you go to women's Bible studies or church or wherever. So check that out. The link is in the podcast notes. And also, if you want to support us, you can do that through our Patreon, which you can join for as little as $5 a month and get access to our exclusive Facebook group. Or as we're coming up to the end of the year, if you have some money left in your donation budget, would you consider giving it to Bare Marriage, as we have tax-deductible receipts available within the United States. We're hoping to work on that in Canada and some other countries as well. But we've got some really big things planned that we need to raise money for 2025, including some more peer-reviewed articles that we want to write, some translations that we'd like to do. And you'll be hearing more about that soon in some upcoming podcasts. But we would love it if you would give to the Good Fruit Faith Initiative of the Bosco Foundation. And the link is in the podcast notes. Now, speaking of peer-reviewed articles, what you're going to hear in my interview with Christy is me making reference to our peer-reviewed article that is now live. And we haven't actually officially announced that on the podcast yet. So I guess this is me going, yay, we did it. But our article, Sanctified Sexism, is in this month, November 2024, the journal Sociology of Religion. So this is a really big deal. Our data set for the Great Sex Rescue has now officially been peer reviewed. And Joanna, Rebecca, and I are going to be talking about that in an upcoming podcast at the end of the year. What our article said, what's been the fallout from it, because a bunch of places have covered our article, and how we should think about research going forward. So we are just so thrilled with that. And it's because of people like you donating that made it possible for us to do this. So we are very grateful to those who gave money so that we could do our marriage study for our marriage book that's coming out in the new year, so that we could write these papers, and then maybe, hopefully, please, God, please, change the way that seminaries, that counseling schools, that pastors and counselors are trained when it comes to marriage and sex. Because if we can get it in the academic literature, then hopefully it will trickle down into how people teach as well. So that's really cool. And now, without further ado, here is our interview with Christy. Well, I am so thrilled to have on the podcast today Dr. Christy Bauman, and she is a licensed therapist. She's a PhD, and she's written an awesome book that I'm so excited to talk about, Christy, called Her Rites. You tell us the subtitle, because I always forget.
You know what? I'm going to turn around and read the subtitle, because even though I just told you I knew it, A Sacred Journey for the Mind, Body, and Soul. You can tell when our editors have helped us do things that we're like, oh yeah, that does convey it, doesn't it?
Yeah. I never remember my own subtitles, so that's all cool. And Christy, you are married to someone who's also been on this podcast before, your husband, Andrew.
Yeah. We're both writers. I mean, we're both therapists by trade, but we both love to write. And that's actually saved our marriage. And it's also been great for our career. But yes, I think it's been so good to be married to a man who has like interests. And at times it's been absolutely infuriating, but we do a lot of work together. And that's been so great, actually. It's been so good.
Absolutely. Okay, well, I got to read an early copy of this book. Now, Her Rites is already out. It published in May.
Yes.
And I couldn't get my act together to interview you before this, so I'm glad that you're here.
Thank you.
Um, and I read an early copy of this, I think, and I was just really blown away by um how practical it is, how beautiful it is, how it encourages you to think about your own story. And honestly, I had never thought about half the stuff you talk about. So I'm like, oh, wow, I need to go on a journey. So let's dive in and explain to me why rituals are important.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that the old church, I think historically, I think even if we go back to Greek and Roman time, there's this sense of we do a ritual or a rite of passage. If we look at Jewish Hebrew studies, rites of passage are things that are happening all the time. And I do think in a melting pot culture in the Western world, we have kind of removed ourselves from more of those traditional or cultural rites of passage, quinceañeras, bar mitzvahs, like even birthday parties, anniversaries. These are things that we might get flowers for or go on a date, and we remember the date and we know we need to, but we haven't become creative about how to actually embody them. And so that's kind of the premise of rites of passage is have you embodied your own story and these rites of passage that you've probably lived through and not really thought about or not really thought it's important to ritualize. But just as I would say celebrating a birthday or honoring a loss, there is something very powerful about the body being intentional of marking these moments, these rites of passage.
We had a 25th anniversary party a number of years ago now, and I knew it was important to celebrate, and I enjoyed the party. I did, but the whole time I also felt kind of embarrassed, like I'm making a big deal out of myself, you
Yeah,
know? And
that's
and
interesting.
yeah, I think we kind of get that way.
Yeah, or like we don't know. And yet I feel so grateful for people who invite me into celebration or into grief. I feel invited. I feel like I'm in the inner circle. So it's interesting why we feel embarrassed about inviting someone when I would imagine you love attending other people's
Yeah.
parties or you love attending intentional moments that mark an event, right? It's
Mhm.
like we actually love celebrating. And if we look at the life cycle as we age, our losses are going to increase, and so celebrations become more important. Even if we talk about a funeral being a celebration of life, celebrations actually hold a lot and they make meaning for life. They're meaning makers. So I love
Mhm.
that you guys had a 25-year party. And I'm wondering if, yeah, there's needs to be some reorientation of what does it mean to intentionally invite other people to bear witness to 25 years of being married and of celebrating
Yeah.
that journey, you know?
Yeah. No, I love that. And I think you open the book by saying that the whole point of this is to realize that we belong to ourselves and that the stories we tell ourselves about our lives matter, you
Yes,
know? Now, and you open it and then you say, I know that's going to rub some people the wrong way, the idea that you belong to yourself.
right.
Because, in the church we say, well, we belong to Christ, which is obviously true.
It's true.
We do
First.
belong to Christ. But why is it important for us to realize that we belong to ourselves as well?
Right. And now we're in the realm of the Imago Dei, right? Understanding that a lot of us have been conditioned in the psychological world to belong to something other than ourselves, and that loses our own identity. So
Mhm.
knowing our identity, yes, our identity is in Christ. And I would say that because that actually is a corrective filter. But when we look to the image of God, the Imago Dei that we are created in, we're looking at a part of God that is displayed in us, that's not displayed in any other human next to
Mhm.
us. And so to me, it's actually amplifying God's goodness. It's amplifying Christ's identity. It's amplifying what our Creator was doing whenever He created every leaf to look different, every snowflake to be different. Every human story, and every human body is a different representation of God.
Mhm.
And so I love the invitation of getting to know a story. I mean, I sit across a person week after week and I listen to story, right? And I'm thinking, how can I be curious? I am looking for the parts of God that I don't see displayed anywhere else in that exact likeness. And then that's what I'm going to invite and tease out of them is the Imago Dei that they bear.
Oh, that's lovely. I love that. Okay, so let's get you talk in this book about there's different times that we need to process, celebrate, mark, etc. And you call these rites of passage. And the first one is birth.
Yeah, birthright, which
Yeah.
people don't remember their birth for the most part, right? And also what I would say is very new to the church, probably not new as much to psychology, but in utero work, which means that whenever your heart started beating, do we actually know when the soul is brought into the body? But you were a being, you were
Mhm.
knit, as you know, scripture says we're knit in God's womb. And so, what is God doing when He's knitting you? What was actually happening in your story? And if I'm an investigator of people's stories, I am going to be curious about even conception in utero and then how they were brought into the world, because I think that story begins to tell us a theme of our life story. And so,
Mhm.
when we're growing in our identity, we're going to look at how we came into the world. Were we celebrated? Were we not? Did we
Mhm.
come in out of what someone named an accident? Did we come in out of intentionality? Where do we engage our parent story with our birth? How was that brought in? What's our story with our mother? What's our story with our father? And what's our birthright? And biblically, if you're female, and
Mhm.
if you're or if you're male and you're not firstborn male, right? We see with Esau, we see there is a fight over birthright.
Mhm.
Birthright is something that the Bible talks about for the firstborn male, but we don't understand what birthright means then for everyone else. So
Right.
it's a journey to learn what each of our birthrights are.
Yeah. And what does that mean? Tell me what that means
Right.
practically.
So if you look in the Webster Dictionary, a birthright is to any human who lives and breathes and moves. It's basically what we might hear politically. There's a fight about is life at the heartbeat? Is it at the birth? But what we're talking about either way is whenever you decide that you
Mhm.
believe life is happening, you get a birthright, which is you have a right to live and to move and be in this earth. Now then as you grow up, the government or these systems would decide, do you have the right to be educated? Do you have the right to have a meal? Things like that, or more societal and citizenship
Mhm.
ideas. But birthright in itself is you get to be alive and
Mhm.
you get to live in this world. And again, it's a concept that we don't really ritualize. And so, therefore, if we're looking at generations of people who don't have an identity, I'm going to start there with, well, tell me when you knew you had a right to be on this earth.
Mhm.
And what was God telling you in that moment by how you were brought into this world? So it's a very narrative story, but there's a spiritual foundation to all of this. Uh,
Yeah.
and the psychology is we're looking at identity. The spirituality is we're looking at our identity in Christ. And
Mhm.
we're looking at where was I adopted, right? Scripture tells us you were adopted into this faith. Okay, what does that mean? Well, when someone goes to their adoption ceremony, it's the moment that they legally belong to someone, belong to these parents. So when did you, in a sense, legally start to belong to God? And did your life
Mhm.
belong to God? And here we're in the realm of birthright.
Yeah. Well, that's really cool. Um, I really liked in the section of your book you talked about, I think her name was Angie, who was trying to figure out what her birth story was. Because you have this exercise that you take people through where, what was going on in your parents' lives when your mom was pregnant? What was going on when they chose to conceive you or when you were conceived, even if it wasn't by choice, right? What was going on when you were born? And you had her walk through all of that. And she actually understood a lot more about herself after that because her birth story was not that great.
Right, right. And sometimes, particularly in the work of marriage, our marriages, when we are trying to co-create and when we're trying to conceive, usually there is some sense of either fear or tension or just the everyday dynamic of a couple learning how to co-create together. Birth order, fertility, all of these things are playing in. Sexual health in the marriage, all these dynamics are part of the pot that you were cooked in,
Mhm.
right? And so part of that is being an investigator of your own story and understanding how you got here and what was happening in the ethos around you, right? Like I had a client tell me just the other day, I know where I conceived all of my kids because I know what country we were in because we were missionaries in that place. Well, geography matters. Geography is actually impacting part of that. So
Mhm.
is the geography of our family of origin. So is the geography of our parents' marriage during
Mhm.
that season. And is it directly correlated in a way that it's going to impact detrimentally? I don't think so, but it's very helpful for us to start to understand our identity by how we were conceived.
We one of the issues we had in our own family, no, let me back up a minute. Let me just say this about Angie is that, one of the things that she realized as you walked her through her own birth story was that she was kind of created to be like her mother's surrogate, like, because there was such tension in the marriage and the mom actually named her in such a way that it kind of sounded like you're the one who's going to fulfill me. And so she felt that from the very beginning that she was really enmeshed with her mom. And so realizing that happened way back then, like opened up a huge
Door for her,
door for her
right?
to reclaim, no, I was created to live my own life,
Mm.
not my
Yes.
mom's life.
Yes. And now we're in the realm of attachment styles and our attachment
Mhm.
styles with our parents or our caregivers are indicators of our attachment styles or our propensity with God,
Yeah,
whether it's a pushback from it or it's an overcompensation for it.
yeah,
We
yeah,
attach to God based on how we engaged with our earthly attachments, so to
yeah,
speak.
yeah. I know. I think the person in our family who has, and I hope she doesn't mind me sharing this, but I've talked about it before on the podcast, but um, has the weirdest may not be the right word, but the most intertwined birth story would be my youngest daughter, Katie, because she was conceived right after our son died. And
Mm,
so, she's always had to, and we've always talked about like, if Christopher had lived, Katie wouldn't be here. And then when I was pregnant, I was so hoping for a boy because Christopher had died. But then when she was born, it, like I said, like it was like, oh my gosh, this is who I needed. And it was like she was a gift because she was so cuddly and she and Rebecca grew up so close. And it was like a lovely, lovely family.
mm,
And I think one of the things that we did, and I hope we did this right, is that I always talked about this out loud because I knew that she was going to pick up on this anyway,
mm.
right?
Yeah.
So
Well,
it's like, let's make it out loud so that she doesn't have to discover it in some therapy session when she's 30. And she always says that she sort of sees her life as it's just parallel universes. Like, in this universe that we are, Katie's here and it's perfect, right?
yeah.
And in another parallel universe, maybe Christopher would have been there, but Katie's supposed to be here. And that's really the way I see it too. I can't picture my life without her. And it was like that from the moment that, I was pregnant really, and especially from the moment she was born. But it is strange when you're born in weird circumstances.
It's true. And I love what you did because you brought it to light, right? You said you're going to pick up on this in some way. This is the story. I'm going to tell you the story so you don't have
Mhm.
to wonder. And parents are our story keepers until we're old enough to remember our own stories. And so
Yeah.
that is the greatest gift you can give her is the story. You're not God. You don't know why those circumstances happened the way they did,
Hmm.
but you get to show her that one, we serve a God who is ever bearing and always creating and continues to create even after there's loss and after there's death. And there's
Hmm.
something about the invitation into that mystery that is such beautiful parenting rather than trying to make the story sound a certain way and maybe withholding things in hopes that she'll believe something instead of just working it out. This is the God and the world that we live in. This is our story. This is our family story.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
That.
Um, so we understand, we go through our birth story. We understand, no, I have the birthright to live my own life and to have my own identity that is special. And at the end of your book, so you take us through what each of these rights are, and then at the end of the book, you have really practical exercises to help people work through these rights and mark them. And I love that. So you can write your own birth story. Um, but let's talk about the next one, the rite of initiation.
Yeah. Yeah. The rite of initiation is the first time, right? So it's that understanding of naivety, like what I did not know before, what my body had not felt before, and then the moment that it feels it for the first time or experiences it for the first time. And there's a couple things about rite of initiation. One, a lot of trauma and a lot of harm usually happens in this rite of passage
Hmm.
because it's the first time and because we are naive. So I'm mindful to bring that out. But also, the rite of initiation invites us into how we want to initiate ourselves as we age. And I, I, I think that I'm going through rites of initiation even at 44. Like there are moments that this 44-year-old body, having lived through what it's been through, will walk up to a situation that maybe it's done 20 times before or 5 times before, but I do it differently because I'm coming differently. And how I was initiated into rites and how I went to first times is going to impact how I do first times now. And what I would say is my motto in those moments is I want to live brave now.
Hmm.
So what does it mean in that moment for me at 44 to go through a rite of initiation and initiate myself into knowing something anew?
Hmm.
Well, I'm going to try to be brave right now, is what my motto has been.
I
Um,
love that. And there's all kinds of different things like that women just go through for the first time. Like
yes.
women especially,
Yeah.
our periods. And I wonder if the reason that boys get marked so much when they're 13 is because they don't have a period, whereas girls, well, it's obvious, right? Like now
Yeah.
you're a woman and all the stupid things they say to you when you're 11 and bleeding for the first time. But anyway, you
Yes.
know, um, but yeah, so we have our first period. You have, the first time you have sex, whether it's consensual or not. Like
These,
these are
these
big
are
firsts.
initiation, right? And so your body is experiencing something, and there either can be curiosity and wonder and excitement, or there's fear and closing off and protecting of ourselves, depending on if the situation is safe and consensual. And I think even, in the book I wrote, Theology of the Womb, I go through this understanding that when we bleed, it is important to know how our mothers or our sisters or who was around us to help us understand that we were bleeding. And biblically or historically, the idea of gathering together of a red tent was we had people around us during the rite of initiation. They were able to bear witness, and there was something kind about that. And now there's a more alienation in the rite of
Mm-hmm.
initiation. We, mostly young girls, do not have people bearing witness to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's also something where culturally don't have a village raising us, and there's an impact on that. And so for me, I think it's even as I'm going in and I'm in perimenopause, what does it mean for me to invite women to be alongside me in that journey? Because maybe I didn't have it or it wasn't there for me. The infrastructure wasn't there, but I know that I want community in these stages of life as I change. So an initiation for me might be inviting people into that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Starting a monthly Zoom call with other friends who I know are in that same place and talking about how our hormones are different now and our weight loss is different now or
Mm-hmm.
gain or our body image, what's impacting our sexuality, right? And that's all part of it is I think initiation, though it's happening in our bodies only to us, community and being bore witness to is so important.
Yeah. Okay. Two free menopause pieces of advice. All
Oh yeah,
right.
I'm ready.
If you wake up in the middle of the night and you wonder if you might have to pee,
Yeah.
Just go. Just
Okay.
go
All
without
right.
even thinking about it. Just go because you'll be able to get back to sleep so much faster.
Okay. Don't just wonder and then start waking up longer and then no.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Yep.
just go as soon as the thought crosses your mind.
Okay.
Don't
Okay.
don't talk yourself out of it. And the second thing is this was the symptom that I no one had ever told me about. My eyes are so dry. Because at menopause, everything kind of dries up, you know? And I've talked a lot on the blog what to do, with vaginal dryness, and there's different suppositories you can get, estrogen therapy, etc.
Yeah.
But black cohosh, it's a supplement, really helps. I don't know if it'll help anyone else,
See?
but it helps me. But I didn't know. I didn't know my eyes would get dry. They started to hurt. I couldn't figure out what was going on.
Yes. Yes. I mean, I love that. I'm like, I have black cohosh, so I'm like, okay, great. I'm still gonna write it down for myself.
Yeah.
Um, but this is it, right? These are the
Mhm.
moments where we realize, I was actually just listening to an interview with Tara Westover. She wrote the book Educated, and she says, I don't think a person can stay resilient all the time, but I do believe a community can.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to think that as I am writing a book on the rites of passage that women need to know themselves and to belong to themselves. That part of belonging to yourself is being individuated, but then asking to be bore witness to, asking people to come alongside you, asking the village to all be their own people, but to be in together of these rites of passage. And so,
Hmm.
as much as it feels individual, it's just as equally communal. And I needed you to give me those two
Yeah.
secrets, right? We need each other
Yeah.
to, in a sense, be resilient, like to
Yeah.
stay resilient.
Yeah. In this section you talk about how it is really our mothers who teach us,
Mm,
how to be content in the world as a female.
yeah,
And sometimes that teaching isn't the best.
yeah,
We don't all have really good models about what it means to be a woman.
yeah, yeah. So I work with a lot of adult women, and the opposite gender wound in any therapy room is always not what I would call low hanging fruit, but what I would call low hanging fruit. It's always there.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning we can always talk about the opposite gender parent and their impact in our dynamic. But the mother and the daughter, it's so beautiful and it's so intimate, and it can also be so wicked and so subtle. And that is a hard reality to bear.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think, to the level that we suffer is the level we feel entitled. And so there are many mothers who are like, I did the best I could.
Yeah.
And that makes so much sense, but it's also a bind for the daughter to not push back and say, and I wanted more.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's not for everyone, but it's common that our mothers tell us what we can be, right? We can watch the Olympics this summer and we can see women on there, 40-year-old women running and think to ourselves, wow, that is not my mother. She did not teach me I could be an Olympian. And some of those girls or those women are saying, my mother was an Olympian
Mm-hmm.
and I am. I'm not an Olympian. My daughter is not going to look and say, oh, I thought about being an Olympian because my mother was. She's not. Is that good or bad? It's what it is. But for her to have the freedom to say, Mom, I kind of wish you had pushed yourself in these ways so that I had something to look up to, that's my growth edge, right? That's for me to build and say, that makes sense to me. This is why I didn't pursue it. This is what was happening for me in my story. What in your story, what are you feeling invited to? Do you want to live a larger story? Because we pace our daughters and then at some point we let them surpass us,
Yeah.
right? And that's what every you that movement from girlhood to womanhood, that's that moment where she gets to surpass and run a little bit ahead. And we say, go for it, girl. I taught you how to do this. You know this. But that's not always the story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's important to process, right? Like, what was your story of what it meant to be a woman? What was your story? And, you say in initiation, it's that moving from unknowing to knowing in whatever element of your life we're talking about, whether it's sexually or um, yeah, with your body or with your purpose as a woman. And it's, yeah, that moving from naivety to experience,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And those things can be really, yeah, hard to process. But if we don't mark them, and then I think they can still have an impact on us without us realizing it, right? And that's really the problem.
Right. Right. Because experience helps us feel like we know what we're capable of. Once
Hmm.
we've experienced it, we know what our bodies can handle, what they can't handle. Like we have a sense of more identity. And if we're not even allowed to say, "Hey mom, you didn't actually risk in those places, so then I didn't risk in those places, or I didn't know how to, or I didn't feel invited," that can be remedied very quickly. That's the beautiful part of this. Right?
Hmm.
There's a difference between a mother who is afraid or limited in what she had, but she can say in that moment, "You're right. I didn't invite you. What does this look like? Let's do this now." Or there can be an insecure mother who says, "I did the best I can.
Hmm.
Why would you eat like," and then all of a sudden it's about the daughter feeling shame that she wanted more or that she felt like she didn't get that invitation.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, not all of us have mothers that are going to handle this well. And so it's like learning how to look back on these moments where you did feel shame or you didn't feel supported, and give yourself grace to rewrite them, right? Like what would it look like if you were to do it again?
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. Yes.
Yeah.
And the truth of it is we have a God who gives us second and third and fourth chances. And
Mm.
so can we live in that same way ourselves in that moment where we think, "Oh, I failed and I'm going to give myself grace." And that is also what I'm going to implement to my children is that they're going to make mistakes and they're
Mhm.
going to give themselves grace and we're going to keep growing. And we have many chances. It's actually always right in front of us, which is incredible. That's the part of the resurrection story. There's always an opportunity for something to happen, which leads us, if we jumped, the next rite of passage is exile, and exile informs the next rite of passage, which is creation. So
Mhm.
I'm
Mhm.
zooming through those, but what I would say is I love that each grow on each other and
Mhm.
that it's a never ending story. So yes, there's always grace to
Yeah.
step into doing it differently, doing it better, doing it again, whatever that is.
Yeah. And one of the ones that I talk about a lot here on Bare Marriage is, what to do if your initiation into sex was bad,
Yeah,
right? Like, let's say you had one of those terrible honeymoons, which we talk about all the time,
all
which
the
is ever so common. And we have so many amazing stats on that coming up in our new book, The Marriage You Want, which is coming out in March.
That's
Like,
amazing.
our honeymoon stats are atrocious and amazing at the same time, like what people have gone through.
Yes.
So I'm excited to share that with all of you in starting in probably January and February. But what about these people who had horrible honeymoons or horrible initiations in other ways? And the dynamics in your marriage just got started really badly, right? And sex was for him and it was obligation, and her libido crashed because of that, and it didn't feel pleasurable. And now you want to rewrite it and you want to start again, but it's hard
Right.
because you have all
Right.
this baggage.
It's hard. And I love that um that is going to be brand new for you. Meaning like that moment is you coming with a body that's maybe jaded, that's maybe discouraged. And so the opportunity to be wowed, to the growth potential, I guess, is what I'm saying. It's risky. It's risky to come and say, "I'm actually going to offer you myself again." And what can we know here and what can we experience here? So I do. I hear it and I'm like, yes, there are so many terrible stories. So many
Yeah.
terrible stories. And I also feel the part of me that's maybe solution focused or just has seen it is there's potential for so much growth.
Yeah.
And that can be a really kind and mind-blowing invitation.
Yeah. But sometimes it does start. by acknowledging the initiation story with your
Oh,
spouse and saying, "Yeah, this was bad." And
and
how can we mark that? How can we put it behind us? How can we launch forward? So I love that. All right, I want to get through two of them quickly so that we can spend some more time on one of them. But yes, the next one's the rite of exile.
yes.
Um, when you need to leave others to find yourself.
Hmm.
It's often seasons of grief.
Yeah.
Um,
It's the desert
and
place. It's the
yeah,
where you hear all your own inner thoughts, and you hear other people's critiques and other people's thoughts. And I say that the gift of exile, when you know you're done with exile, is when you hear your truest voice and you realize that you had to get in a quiet enough place to wrestle down all those other voices and hear your own self.
yeah.
And you know you're done with exile when you know what you know.
Hmm.
Leave it.
Yeah. You told a story in there about when you moved from Seattle to North Carolina and how hard that was for you.
Oh, that was a dark place for me, and I go into it in detail, but basically there was just a moment, and you almost don't say this out loud when you're a mental health therapist, like that there's moments where you think, I'm just gonna be done. Like maybe I'll just be done.
Hmm.
And I I was leaving everything I had created as a wife and as a mother and as my career as a woman, and I felt like I was literally driving into exile of I would have nothing again. It felt like a wasteland. And yet my husband was so excited to be moving. My kids were just needy in every sense, so it didn't matter. And I felt so alone. And there was that moment, I tell the story that we're in our camper van, we're driving cross country, everything's packed up. We've just said goodbye to the place where I buried my child, my first home that I had created everything in, where I had gotten my degrees, where I had a job as a professor, where I had published, just everything that I had created that felt like was mine. And I am leaving it all. And it was the walk from my yelling kids in the back of the van to back to the passenger seat and into my seatbelt that I passed the side door. And I thought, I could just jump out. I could just jump out and I wouldn't have to feel this amount of heartache and fear.
Hmm.
Um, and instead, because I saw that the door was unlocked, and instead I just pushed that lock down and I got into my passenger seat. And, Andrew, my husband, was listening to a podcast on financial freedom, or something. And I just was in a very different place than I was. And I had to take that moment to say, hey, I need you to know how bad it is. And he couldn't save me. And I had to contend with in that moment, no one could save me. I just had to be with myself and I had to build the resilience that I would be okay if I stayed. But I had to keep bringing my voice in that moment
Hmm.
where I feel like darkness was saying, just end it, just don't speak, don't even engage it anymore, just be done. And I was like, no, I'm going to choose life and I'm going to choose my words and I'm going to choose to stay. And I'm going to choose
Yeah.
to tell
Yeah. And I think we all have those moments. We all
you.
have those moments that we do have to mark and we do have to acknowledge the losses. Because I think we don't do that.
Yeah,
Like we're so afraid to name what we've lost because it'll put us in the depth of despair, or we're being selfish, or we're holding it up as an idol before God, or you
right,
know,
right.
whatever we may say.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's all the things. And again, and not to just like look at the bright side, that was a dark moment and it took me a long time to get out of that space. But exile informs the actual like soil that we plant in for
Hmm.
creation and what we can create from those dark places can be really beautiful. Um,
Hmm.
and that felt hopeful to me. Again, I wouldn't say it's easy. I don't even know. I mean, I've been here 2.5 years now. I can't tell you that I love it. I can't tell
Hmm.
you this is where I want to spend the rest of my life, but I do know that I'm here and that I'm showing up and that I'm putting my big girl pants on and I'm doing some adulting and I'm speaking to places that I feel discouraged or I feel held back from. Um, and but also like I'm naming my loss. And I'm also not
Mhm.
staying in my loss. I'm not burying myself in my loss. I'm watering the little like seedling that's coming out of it. And
Mhm.
I'm tending to that part and I'm growing deeper roots. And that's the part that I think comes from exile is we get deeper roots in who we are. I know who I am more now from surviving that moment.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I'm rooting myself in a deeper identity.
Right. And then we have the rite of creation, rite of creating, which I actually did like this part of your book best, I think. I loved everything you wrote about cooking and,
Ah,
you know, just the legacy of especially coming out of the slave population and the recipes that got passed on and the importance of that, since that's the only way we have to memorialize and to
yeah,
hear
yeah,
these women speak through their cooking. For me, I just love it because I'm such a knitter. I just, I love knitting. My daughter Katie designs the most incredible dresses. She doesn't even use patterns. Like we're really big on creating. My grandmother used to, I have stuff my great grandmother knit. Um, and and then obviously I'm a writer too and everything like that. But
yeah.
yeah.
But it sounds like you have story cloths. Like
Yes.
you guys have
Hmm.
passed down part of the legacy in your family is these
Hmm.
cloths that hold generationally and
Hmm.
it's incredible.
Yeah.
That is incredible. I have inherited a lot of crocheted blankets and things like that, but I myself don't do that and haven't done it with my daughter. So I love that you guys do that and you create those things. It's
Yeah.
incredible. The story is in the stitching.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's really
I have these one pair of socks. My mother was going to frame them. I knit them in 2019 and I was for my or 2020 they're baby socks that I knit for my grandson Alex who was a year old at the time, and I was going to give them to him at Christmas, and I knit one and then I put it away and then I knit the second, and when you pull them out they're totally different sizes even though I used the same stitches because I was so stressed when I was knitting one that they were a lot tighter. And my mom thought this was hilarious and is gonna, I think she said she was gonna frame them one day, but you know.
Oh,
They-
well, even do you hear the amount of bonding and of connection that you guys all share through this, and clothing babies, clothing people. It's
Mhm.
actually a really under talked about. Like we don't really talk about the beauty and the power of clothing. Like I think even scripturally a mother clothing her family
Mhm.
was such a big deal, or adorning a bride with
Mhm.
certain patterns and materials. I think we don't talk about that. We talk about fashion these days,
Mhm.
but we do not actually talk about the protection and the power and the intimacy of someone sewing
Mhm.
something for you, knitting something for you, and what's actually happening when you wear that.
Mhm.
So I love that. I love
Yeah.
that your family knows that.
Yeah. So that's us. And then you have the right of intuition,
Yes.
which I want to spend a little bit of time here because this is so interesting, for what we do here at Bear Marriage. But it's understanding that the body knows what's happening and learning to validate and listen to what your body's telling you.
Yes. Yes. And so um the my friend Heather Stringer on a podcast had said this and it caught me. She said, the most common thing I hear women say is, I don't know. Those three words. She said, get
Hmm.
them out of your vocabulary. Like if those words are there. But as I've listened to that, what I realize is that I don't know is where you've separated yourself from listening to your intuition. So your
Hmm.
intuition is the things you do know, the things that come up in your mind, and you're either in a situation where it's not a good idea to say it, it won't like move the conversation along, but you have a sense, you know something, but you just swallow it and you hold it. And then we as women often do it, men do it also, but when we stop and we swallow what we do know, our body stops informing us because it knows it won't advocate for us. It
Hmm.
knows it won't say that. So then we start to second guess ourselves. And then we have filler lines like, I don't know, but this is an option, or I think this. And what the right of intuition is coming back to she knows or he knows. We know what we know. And we
Hmm.
actually have to be curious why we aren't saying it or why we've stopped saying it. And we've built that separation in our own body away from our gut. And we know even physiologically, our gut is informing the neurotransmitters in our brain. And so
Hmm.
we know that our gut knows. And when we're stopping ourselves from saying that, when we're saying, I don't know, then we're actually keeping ourselves further from the right of intuition.
Someone told me yesterday, and I haven't fact checked this, so I need to fact check this, but someone said that in Hebrew, a lot of emotions are actually described as sensations.
Mm,
So, anger is like a burning in the nose, or, um, some of the initial words for a lot of these emotions are actually body sensations, um, which I found fascinating.
ah,
But isn't it interesting how so often in the church, women are told that emotions are sinful? Certain emotions are sinful. And we talked about this earlier this year in some of our deep dives on the book Lies Women Believe or the book The Excellent Wife, where over and over again, we're told that if you have this emotion, it is a sin. And you can't trust your emotions. You have to trust faith. And that shuts down women's intuition. And then we wonder why women marry abusers because you've been told not to pay attention to red flags.
right, right. It is so true. And that goes back to, I mean, even that earlier stage of what did we see in our own home? What did we grow up in? What kind of church did we grow up in? Were we under leadership that was telling us not to trust our gut? And why? Why did we teach people that? It doesn't make sense. Actually, women are embodied, men are disembodied, even by their sexual reproductive organs. Our organs are inside of our bodies. And
Mhm,
men's penis, they're outside of their body. And so
mhm,
their work is to be embodied. Ours is actually to get out of our bodies, right? We're so in our bodies that we have to understand how to regulate through that. But for men, I don't think it's that way. And so when we're listening to a teaching that doesn't align, to me, I would say, like, oh, that makes sense for the masculine to teach it that way.
mhm,
And that doesn't actually align physiologically with the female's body. It
mhm,
doesn't actually align with how her body was created. And so there's a disalignment there. And that
yeah.
makes her crazy and her question herself and not understand. And say instead
Mhm,
of going with her intuition and saying, what was your intuition saying? How
yeah.
does that align with truth or not align with truth?
Well, I think too, when we grow up in a culture which devalues women's voices, we're told not to listen, like
Right.
that we probably don't know.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
supposed to listen to an authority.
Right.
You
And
have
so
all these people over you. Yeah.
you're conditioned in a sense to be this way. And if I haven't sat across a number, countless marriages where someone will say, I did that because that's what I was told.
Hmm.
I continued to have sex with him because that's what I was told.
Hmm.
I continued to not listen to my body
Hmm.
uh, because that's what I was told, right? How many people, wives are trying to figure out, was I maritally raped? Was I not? I didn't
Hmm.
say no, but I was saying no in my mind, or I did say no by using these excuses, but I didn't. So was that his fault? Was that my fault? Was that our pastor's fault? Was that my culture's fault? It gets really confusing. And all of that is from having that separation of what did you know? What was your
Hmm.
gut telling you from the very beginning?
I would like to take a minute to thank our amazing sponsor for this podcast, and that is Ever AJ. They make the most beautiful, cute, fun, functional vegan Bible cases. And I'm totally serious. When they reached out to me to see if they could sponsor, I was so excited because now I get one, and they're amazing. They have regular floral Bible cases with lots of areas to put pens and paper and notepads, and they're just really attractive and modern looking. They also come in crossbody purses, in wristlets, and more. At Ever AJ, They're inspiring purpose and beauty with faith and function. And their mission is to provide beautiful yet functional products for women that align with their Christian values. And so they create products that enhance both practical needs and aesthetic preferences while cultivating a desire for the Lord. And honestly, it seriously is both practical and aesthetic. So please take a look at the link in the podcast notes. And if you're looking on YouTube, you'll be able to see some of these amazing products on the screen now. But when you support our sponsors, you help support our podcast, because when our sponsors do well, it's so much easier to get other sponsors, and this helps keep us on the air. So this makes an incredible Christmas gift for a woman in your life, your daughter, your sister. If you bought our Kingdom Girls Bible when they were our sponsor a couple of weeks ago, this is a great chance to get a cover for it that is so pretty. So do check out Ever AJ. The link is in the podcast notes. We're recording this a little bit before it's going to go live. And so at the point we're recording this, I just finished recording a bunch of our podcasts on the book, The Excellent Wife. And there's just one anecdote, which is like blaring siren at me right now, where she talks about a woman, how important it is to have sex with your husband and how you really shouldn't say no. And she talks about a woman who feels nauseated by her husband, but you have to push through that anyway. It's like, if you're feeling nauseated, there is a reason.
There's a reason.
Your
There is,
body is trying to tell you something, and pushing through is not going to help. It's
right,
only going to make things worse.
right. And it's only going to enable your partner to be more sexually unhealthy.
Yeah.
Like then we're actually in a place where we're not even inviting the other into sexual health, into what it means to know the other or be known by
Hmm.
the other. So you're right. If your body is telling you that strongly, it's
Hmm.
telling you for a reason.
Yeah. Yeah. Before we hit the record button, you were talking about how this rite in particular, this rite of initiation, you saw this so much in our book, She Deserves Better, and they kind of complement because we're coming with all the data. Hey, here's what
Yes,
you've been told. Here's why you second guess yourself. Here's why, here's what happens when you believe this stuff. Here's how you get disembodied. And then your book, which it really is beautiful, is all narratives of how you can better embody that and get over all the problems that we talked about in She Deserves Better.
right. And what we are so grateful for, Sheila, is again, we're working with women and men and marriages who we're unraveling a culture that has set them up for failure. And so
Yeah.
trauma and abuse are invisible in the church in a lot of times. And so we have the visible ones.
Hmm.
Those are a lot easier to navigate, right? Because there's physical abuse or there's domestic violence in a visible way. Spiritual abuse, emotional abuse, these invisible abuses are much more tricky and they get inside of our bodies. And so they hijack. And then when I'm always talking, when I see someone who is in a traumatic state or a triggered response, I'm like, okay, you need to read Sheila's books because all the research is going to be something you can hold on to. It's going to be grounded in something and you will feel so soothed. It's going to be
Hmm.
your first step to regulate yourself.
Hmm.
Then what I realized is when I could get clients to settle their mind, to regulate that, and they could get into their heart and the hurt and the grief and the longing, but then they couldn't translate it into the bedroom, into their home, into their actual marriage. And that is the embodiment piece. And that's where I bring more of the story and the memoir and the body work in the book. I would not start there if you feel like,
Hmm.
whoa, mine is more like a buoy where you can hold on to, catch your breath, and then you dive back deep into it. But man, I have been grateful for your statistics and your research because they are so nice to just stand on solid ground when you've
Hmm.
been in a culture of invisible harm.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's validating to say, yeah, no, I wasn't crazy. This was wrong. This
Right.
did hurt me. I didn't like this. I wasn't sinning by saying I don't want that. Like, yeah. So,
Mm.
yeah. Yeah. So good. All right. Last one, the right of legacy.
Yes.
Um, and I've been thinking about this a lot more. I've said many times in this podcast, I really want to be able to retire in 10 years and have nobody notice because I have raised so many people up in the space that, um, yeah,
Yeah.
that there's so many people saying these messages.
Oh, I love
So
that. Well, it's interesting to think the rite of legacy. The easiest way I say it is Confucius says there are three times we die: when we take our last breath, when we're laid into the ground, and when our name is last spoken on the earth.
yeah.
And what I hear you saying is, in some ways, I want to focus on the first two, how I'm going to prepare for that, or how I'm going to live into my
Mhm.
story until that last moment. Because actually, my name and my work and my research it will continue. And I
Mhm.
feel grateful. And I've put it into people enough that it will continue. And so you're looking at that trajectory of like, my legacy feels full as far as that last death. Like,
Yeah.
the name will continue. I've done the research. I've been faithful to that. And
Mhm.
then what I would say in exploring the rite of legacy, or what I want women to explore, is the actual time that you'll say goodbye to your body. This
Mhm.
vessel that has carried you, this skin, these fingers that were with you since that first breath, since your birth, and will be with you in your last breath. And the song that I actually ended up co-writing for these rites of passage. So I did an album with the book, because my hope was, if I can't get therapy to every person, very similar to you,
Mhm.
here's my legacy. I've done my job. I'm giving
Yeah.
you as much as I can. My idea was, how do we make it accessible? And so put it in a book, put it in an album of music where you can just listen to it and walk through the rites of passage and have therapy through music, or and just journal, light a candle, have some
Mhm.
tea, listen to the album, or artwork where you can look at an image and it can evoke something out of you. So my thought was, how do I make it accessible for people? What I hear you saying is, in the last song we write, it's called Home. And
Mhm.
it is this idea of a woman telling her body, thank you and goodbye. And
Mhm.
so a lot of us as women are so busy raising our kids, running our professions. We are being in our marriage. We are doing so much that our bodies, we don't take the time to actually be with this body we were entrusted with. And so I think that's part of the work of the Rite of Legacy, is, if we have three deaths, how are we being faithful to preparing for those? And
Mhm.
that's the one that I hear. The next one is when I'm laid into the ground. And that would be what my reverend has asked us to do, which is to write our funeral plan. And I take you through that in the book,
Yeah.
is how to
Yeah.
actually write that last day. And I was 42 when I did that. And I thought, why am I doing this at 42? What is this worthwhile?
Mhm.
But when I tell you, I engage my body differently in the way I take a bath or a shower, because of how I want to be with my body now, because I've thought about the time I will have to say goodbye to it. And it's a discipline we aren't taught. We aren't taught to
Yeah.
make time and space for. And it comes out psychologically in the idea of self-care, right?
Right.
But I'm asking women to take a deeper look of being intentional with the and faithful with this body you were given.
Yeah.
And that's not a priority that our society or culture has really put forth,
Yeah.
for us to take on.
That's really powerful. That's
Mm.
really powerful. Okay, so in your book, you know, you talk about all these different times where there are rites of passage when we can memorialize, when we can think about things, right, you know, process our stories. It's a lot of narrative. It's really quite beautiful. And then at the end of the book, you have quite a long section where you take people through each rite and show here's some really practical things that you can do, you know, to work through this rite of passage and to yeah memorialize it. So I want you to help me for two things, okay?
Okay.
One's happy and one's sad. So
Okay.
we'll do happy first.
Okay.
Um, so Joanna, who is our co-author and our statistician on Great Sex Rescue, and she deserves better. She lives out in Edmonton, and we live in Belleville, which is quite near Toronto. So two different. For those of you who know Canada, that's like a 4 hour plane ride. And so she's visiting for a couple of days and she's staying at Rebecca's that's right around the corner. And we just got some really good news about 2 weeks ago. I think by the time this airs, we will have shared this on the podcast already, but we got accepted into the journal Sociology of Religion. So we will officially be peer reviewed with our data set for Great Sex Rescue. And that was such a huge thing. In a way, I feel like that was more momentous than the books being published because our whole thing is we're trying to raise the bar on what counts as research in the Christian church because it's been done so badly. And we wanted to do this well. And so we held ourselves to academic standards and we actually got in a peer-reviewed journal. And it took a lot of work, but we did it. And it was mostly Joanna. And so all three of us are together.
Yes.
I don't know what to do. I feel like we should do something,
I
but
know
I
what
don't know what to do.
I know what you should do.
Okay, tell me.
I was like, Lord, I'm going to need some time to think about this. She just put me on the spot, but okay. So I mean, peer review is a huge thing, part of academia and even getting my dissertation and doing my doctorate. So I think that you guys should do a hooding for each other. So like, do you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
add your doctoral. And so Andrew actually um just got his doctorate last year, but we were going to go to his graduation and ended up not going to Seattle. He was like, I'd rather just be with my family. So we threw our own party. We probably only had 10, we intentionally only had like 10 people there to bear witness, but we all took turns giving a little speech.
Uh-huh.
And then I was able to hood him. So I had my doctoral hooding on and everything. But getting some kind of scarf or sash or something
Uh-huh.
that all three of you have that
Uh-huh.
matches this is what I would do. You're
Okay, okay.
asking me this and you can take it out,
Yeah, yeah,
you don't have to use any of it. But in my creative mind, I'm thinking you're in some way you're having a graduation party.
yeah,
Books that are coming into this peer-reviewed academic, I mean, that's what's happening. They are looked at as a scholarly a- in academia, that's the highest
yeah,
accreditation you have for it. So
yeah.
I would have you guys each hood. I mean, I would always add a little spiritual, like you should get some water or rose oil or some kind of oil and do an anointing when you hood, or like
Uh-huh.
get that oil
Oh, that's sweet.
on
Yeah.
actual material. And then you can give the oil and the scarf or the
Hmm.
hoodie. And then when you all three are separate and in moments where you need to maybe put that on
Uh-huh.
or smell that self again or anoint yourself into workspace or creative space, you know that you come with like the credentials
Yeah.
say that like you all are legit and doctorates in this, right?
Yeah.
It's 10,000 hours. It's however, it's the type of research that makes it
Yes.
credible.
Yeah.
And you guys have that. You've proven that, and that's really beautiful. So that's how I would honor it. I'd have
Okay, I like that. I like that. Okay. Okay. I will talk to them about that because,
anyway.
they're here and we're so busy with trying to figure out, what to do with the four kids, and one of them has a broken leg. And so you're taken up with all the practical stuff of four children. And
But I would try to either find a babysitter or something.
yeah,
You all go out and y'all look for some article, clothing. I mean, I
yeah.
don't know if you want to, we don't have time to sew these things. Maybe you do. I don't
Hmm.
know what your capabilities are, but you could all go out and look for the scent and the cloth
Yeah.
that you want. And you're all together. And then you actually just have a little ceremony after kids are asleep or, at 10
Hmm.
p.m. we light some candles and we just
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I will talk to them about that. All right. Here's a sad one.
okay, okay.
Huh. So today is August 22nd that we're recording this. And on September 4th, which is just in a couple of weeks, I will have the 28th anniversary of my son's death. And I never know what to do on that day. And I don't usually end up doing much of anything. You just kind of try to get through it. Sometimes we'll go to the graveyard. We don't always. Um, but like I feel like when I talk to other people who have lost, whether it's a child or a spouse or, just someone important, your mom, um, what do you do like on those anniversaries to remember them?
I mean, we have a story of loss and so we light lanterns. That's what we've done every year on when we memorialize Brave's death. Um, we fell into that tradition. Some years it hasn't happened depending on where we are. Some years we've gotten a balloon and let it go as a family. I think in those moments for me, it's that I want to be together. I want at least some intentional time. So
Hmm.
even if it's 5 minutes, 30 minutes, I want something intentionally done. I don't know that it has to actually be a physical, um, like I was thinking it'd be interesting if you had some kind of marker image and then everybody just added to it every year. But I don't know. In my own heart, what I long for is that we're all together for just a space of time, even if my kids don't live at home, like on Zoom,
Hmm.
something, a text chain where there is something said. I think it's just about that intentional moment. Like if he were here, we would be doing something to remember, or because he's
Hmm.
not here, we don't remember every day, or we do remember, but we don't know how to memorialize it. So we're
Yeah.
going to do it on this day. So I think even asking your family this year,
Hmm.
like how could we do that? We have two children that we lost that we still haven't named. And my kids feel differently about it. Like we still talk about it, like we're trying to find the names, but in our family chaos, like we just haven't had enough time to like sit down and actually name these two children and all agree on it. Like everybody's thought different things. But with Braves Day, we know like we're going to go out at night, we're going to light a lantern, we're going to let something go. We're going to let something float. We have that in our bodies, but we're still working on the other one. So I guess what I want to say is your body's still asking you to mark it somehow. And you can just listen to that and say, hey, I'm still wondering. I'm still looking for a rhythm this many
Yeah.
years later. Will you guys help me?
Yeah.
Can we be creative as a family of what could be good? And you throw around options and you might not even figure it out this year, but
Hmm.
you're at least listening to your body because your body's saying it wants something tactile.
Yeah.
And that feels like an easy kindness to give it.
Yeah. You know, I used to feel, I don't know, like maybe 10 years ago, um, if I would get upset, I would feel like I was the one causing myself to get upset by thinking about it. I don't know if this makes any sense, but like that the tears were deliberate in some way and that I'd feel badly about that. And then I've started to realize, oh no, wait, these are coming from deep inside and it's not like a deliberate thing at all. It's just,
Right.
yeah.
Well,
It's a
even as your tear just fell, I thought I have a lot of little I have jars that I buy from the dollar store. This is embarrassing, but I love jars because sometimes if there's ash from a fire that was really special, or if there was ash that we burned things that we wanted to put in, bury, so to speak, like I will have people gather it. And just seeing your tear fall, I thought, what if you just had a little bottle somewhere that you gathered your tears in that bottle, as God says he does for us. Like, I wonder if
yeah.
even that in your office, that little bottle or in your bedroom could collect it. And of course it doesn't have all the tears that you've shed over Christopher, but it will just be something, a holder of like, Mama sees you. Like she knows, her body knows, and I love you. And in that moment, it's you just collect it and capture it. And over the years, you capture it and put it in there.
Yeah.
Again, they're all ideas.
Yeah. But the point is just think about it, right? Like think about it and don't let these moments go
The
because
point
they
is,
matter.
yeah, the point is that your body is actually trying to bond with you right now. It's trying to have you hear her say, I need you to do this for me. And that then takes away all the holding in of how do I figure out how to let this out. But she
Mhm.
begins to trust you when you say, okay, I'll be curious. What would you
Yeah.
like? You just listen to her. Like she's
Yeah.
still talking to you. And so she's worth listening to. She wants to mother him somehow.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That's beautiful. That
Yeah.
says something really beautiful about you.
Yeah. Thank you. Huh. Okay. Well, I will send you pictures or something, whatever we do for the celebration with Joanna and Becca
So
or
I
for the
would,
memorial. Yeah.
yeah. I'm like,
Hmm.
just again, I think what the answer is, what's really sweet for listeners to even hear and now is when your body tells you something, be
Yeah.
curious. Don't just
Hmm.
shut it down or don't even try to analyze it. Maybe just be curious first.
Hmm.
And like she's telling you something. We've been trained to think that it needs to be taken and then scrutinized or, taken captive of. And I think, sure, of bad thoughts, of anxiety, or of things leading towards death or evil, but those thoughts sure can be taken captive, but not the ones that are teaching us how to live out of our fullness and how to be fully in who God created us to be. Uh,
Hmm.
those are to be heard and to be held well. Be,
Yeah.
be curious.
Thank you, Christy.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So tell me, what are you hoping? What are you hoping your legacy will be with this book?
Oh my goodness. I know what it is. God told me I was going to teach a women's conference and I felt like God was so clear, Christy, do not let them fall in love with you. Let them
Hmm.
fall in love with themselves because we as women keep walking away from different things to idolize or to try to be like. And really, really, I hope my legacy is that every woman who engages me would engage herself more honestly, more clearly, that she would pick up a mirror and just look at herself long enough until she lives truly into herself. That's all I'm
Yeah.
hoping. That's
Yeah.
really like what I want is for women to be free in who God created them to be,
Yeah.
and not to be afraid and not to compare and just to be fully in that because I think that's what we all need from each other to make it
Hmm.
in this world.
And I am so glad for voices like yours and your husband's, and for this book in particular. Like I said, I learned things I hadn't thought of, and I've been thinking about how to implement it, as you can tell. Um, but I'm just so grateful that there are voices in the church telling women, hey, you're allowed to know yourself. You're allowed to celebrate who God made you to be. You're allowed to be curious. Because up till now, so many of the voices have been, whatever you want, you need to switch that off because of duty.
Right.
Switch off who you are because of duty and obligation and shame. And
Yeah. And that has set us up for failure.
yeah.
It really has. And I actually think it's set our marriages up. And that
Hmm.
breaks my heart. That is what really breaks my heart is when a 20 or 30-year marriage comes into my office and they say, I did what I was told and we're in
Hmm.
ruins.
Hmm.
I think, oh my gosh, we have to do something different. We
Hmm.
cannot set God's children up for this. Like that,
Hmm.
I am not going to set my own children up for this. I
Yeah.
would not teach them to do what I was taught.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I believe that's the heart of God saying, like, no, this isn't what this is what I created. No, trust your heart. Trust the heart I put inside of you. I knit you in your
Mhm.
mother's womb. Like your body is good. Your heart is good. Like I
Yeah.
will guide you. And I think we invite our husbands, we invite our marriages into that same thing. I want men living into their hearts, into their bodies. I
Hmm.
want their bodies to be satiated as much as I want women's bodies to be satiated. And I think God knew what he was doing.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
and I'm not afraid of that. And so I'm like, let's explore that because God was not wrong.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
church may have taught you wrong, but God was not wrong.
No, exactly. And when we can see how, so much of Jesus is just intimacy. It's just knowing people, noticing these key moments in people's lives, entering into them. And I think he just invites us to do the same thing because when we do that, he's there too, right? He was already there.
Yes.
And
And
so
I,
it's
yeah,
it's like, how can we learn to see Jesus in these moments when, that were difficult for us or maybe we're great, but we just never acknowledge them.
right.
So, yeah.
Right. It's
Hmm.
it's so true because I think it's story, body leads to creating. And
Hmm.
so whether that's your own story, what is the story God and you are writing? And then what body did God give you? And what's the story of your body? And then what are you and God creating? And
Hmm.
you take that same philosophy for your marriage. What's the
Yeah.
story of your marriage? What's the body of your marriage? How has it been treated? And what is your marriage creating?
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Okay, Christy, where can people find your books?
Oh, Amazon or your local, I'm not supposed to say that. Your local store. That's I mean
Yes.
the best that we
Yes.
can ask for. And I think reviews. I mean, I think you know this too. And oh, that's what I wanted to say. I think the audiobook is where people need to go. I was able to record it myself and I
Mm.
really appreciated that experience. It felt very holy. And I say that to say a lot of us don't have time to read. I mean, I'm saying that as particularly like semi self-help therapeutic books, they're just harder to read. Like
Yeah.
audiobooks, I'm like, I can get in a good drive or while I'm going to pick up kids and running around between practices. My book's not great for kids in the car, but like on the way to
Yeah.
get children, it's a
Yeah.
it's a great in bite size. And so I would say the audiobook is what I would recommend first.
Hmm.
Um, and but the book can be found wherever
Anyway,
you
yeah, and we will put a link in the podcast notes to all of that. And are you on social media? I don't even know. I follow
I
your
am.
husband everywhere.
I'm on Instagram mostly, but
Okay.
I'm on Facebook also. Yeah, social media is great. You know what's funny is when you're like, it's okay if you find me or not. It doesn't. But I really just want people. Yes, I want them to be able to find me, but I want them to find their own care, whatever that looks like. So yes, Instagram at Christy Bauman. Um, I think my Facebook is the same. Womaneering is the work I do with women. Around their bodies and around seasons and the liturgical calendar and how the church invites us into that. So I do a lot of that work where
Mhm.
I do weekend retreats with women. And I take women into the ocean and I do a trip into Belize where I can help you harvest your own hunt and harvest your own conch and lobster, and then we make ceviche on an island, and I teach you to be in the ocean and how to be in your body. So I love that trip. That's my favorite. But I do a lot of those intensive works with women around their body and their sexual and spiritual health. But yeah, you can find me at social media. I had another thought. Oh yes, that the album is free. So if you look up Her Rites, Sarah Siskin is the actual performer. But if you look on any place you stream your music, I have co-written a song for each rite of passage. And so you can listen to that, even if you don't know if you want to get the book or don't have time for the book. You could download that, have a quiet time, light a candle, get your journal out, and just listen to the songs in order. And it would take you through a therapeutic experience of Her Rites, which I try to offer people because time is limited, but I want to make care abundant. And so,
That's
oh,
that's lovely. Well, thank you. And we will link all those in the podcast notes. So thank you, Christy. I really appreciate this conversation.
Sheila, I'll talk to you soon.
I really appreciated that interview. And yes, I did get emotional a bit. I tend to when I talk about these things. And maybe for you, you're entering an emotional season in the year. And so I really encourage you to pick up her book, Her Rites. I will put the link in the podcast notes. And of course, the link to the Ever AJ Bible Cases is also there, and to how you can donate and keep supporting us here at Bear Marriage through the Good Fruit Faith Initiative or just joining our Patreon. And so please check those things out. I so appreciate you being with us. And for everyone in the United States, happy Thanksgiving. Bye bye, and we'll see you next week.